The last time my father asked me for anything, I was 31 years old, and he asked me to help him move a bookcase. That was it. That was the only time in my life Raymond Calloway ever asked me for help. 31 years I'd been his son, and the man had never once reached out his hand and said, "I need you." Not when the farm equipment broke down 2 seasons in a row. Not when Mom passed and left a silence in that house on Granger Road that lasted for years. Not when his knees got so bad he had to sell the tractor and lease the back 40 to the Hendersons next door. Raymond Calloway was the kind of man who handled things. Who drove himself to every doctor's appointment. Who shoveled his own walk at 78 years old. Who still mowed his own lawn on a riding mower with a bad hip because he said the exercise was good for him, and we all knew better than to argue. He wasn't proud in the difficult way. He was proud in the quiet way. The way men of his generation were built, where asking for help felt like a failure of character rather than a simple human need. So when he called me on a Tuesday morning in February and said the words "I don't feel right," I understood exactly what those 4 words had cost him. I didn't let him finish the sentence. I told him I was already on my way. Welcome to the channel, brothers and fathers. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. This one is going to stay with you. My name is Donald Calloway. I'm 64 years old. I spent 32 years as a high school history teacher in Beaumont, Texas, and I have spent the last 11 years of my life married to a woman I mistook for a partner. I was wrong about that, and I can tell you the exact Tuesday morning I finally understood how wrong I had been. My father was 81. He lived alone on Granger Road, the same house where I grew up. A pale, yellow ranch style with a covered porch and an old pecan tree in the front yard that had been dropping nuts on that driveway since 1974. After Mom passed, he rattled around in that house like a marble in a shoebox, but he wouldn't hear of moving. "I know where everything is," he said. "That's worth more than you think." And honestly, he had a point. Dad's voice on the phone that morning was different. Not thin, not scared, but careful. The way a man talks when he's editing himself to sound less serious than he is. "I don't feel right, Don." Something in my chest. Probably nothing. I'd been standing in my kitchen, watching a cardinal sit on the back fence, and the second he said chest, every other thought left my head completely. "Dad, are you having pain?" A pause. "Pressure. More like." "And my left shoulder's been aching since last night." Last night. He'd waited since last night. I didn't say what I was thinking. I said, "Don't move. I'm coming." My truck was in the garage, but Diane's car, a white Lexus SUV she'd had for 3 years and treated like a second home, was sitting right there in the driveway. Full tank. I knew because she'd mentioned filling it up the day before. Diane worked from home on Tuesdays. I could hear her on a call in the upstairs office, the door half open, that even measured voice she used for clients. I went to the bottom of the stairs. "Diane." Nothing. The call continued. "Diane." Louder this time. A pause in the conversation. Then, muffled, clearly annoyed. "What?" "My dad called. He's having chest pressure and left shoulder pain. I need to take him to St. Luke's. My truck's blocked in by the delivery boxes in the garage. Can I take your car?" Silence. Not a brief silence. A long silence. The kind that tells you someone is calculating. She appeared at the top of the stairs 40 seconds later. She had her wireless earpiece in, her hand over the microphone end, her expression not alarmed, not soft, just inconvenienced. "Don, I'm in the middle of a client call. I know. I just need the keys. I'll have the car back by. I need it at noon. I have a lunch." I looked at her. "Diane, his left arm is." "Call an ambulance, Don. That's what they're for. He doesn't want an ambulance. He had a terrible experience when." "Then call your brother." She was already turning back toward the office. "Gary lives 20 minutes closer. This is not a one-car family situation. Figure out a solution." And she went back into that office and closed the door. Not with anger. Not with a slam. She closed it the way you close a door when the conversation is finished, and you were never really in it to begin with. I stood at the bottom of those stairs for approximately 4 seconds. Then I pulled out my phone. My neighbor across the street, Frank DeLuca, was 67 years old, retired from the post office after 38 years, widower, drove a 10-year-old Dodge Ram that had never once failed to start. He was the kind of man who still kept a paper calendar on his refrigerator and wrote down other people's birthdays. He'd known my father for going on 15 years. Ever since Dad started visiting me here and the two of them discovered they both had opinions about college football that they were willing to defend at length. Frank picked up on the second ring. Don, everything okay? Frank, I need a favor. My dad's having chest symptoms. I need to get him to St. Luke's, and I don't have a car available right now. Any chance? Give me 3 minutes. I'll pull up front. That was the whole conversation. He didn't ask what available meant. He didn't ask why a grown man with a house and a driveway didn't have a car available on a Tuesday morning. He just said 3 minutes, and he meant it. I called Dad while I waited. I'm 2 minutes out, Dad. Frank DeLuca is driving us. A short silence. Frank? You didn't have to get Frank involved. Yes, I did. Just sit down, and don't argue with me. The smallest sound. Almost a laugh. You sound like your mother. Good. Sit down. Frank pulled up in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I know because I was counting. He was wearing his old green Beaumont driller's cap and had a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder, and he said not a single unnecessary word the entire drive to Granger Road, which is exactly what I needed. Dad was sitting on the front porch when we pulled up. He was wearing his good flannel shirt and his cleanest work boots, like he'd gotten dressed for the occasion of being unwell, which was the most Raymond Calloway thing I had ever seen in my life. He stood up slowly when he saw us, and I watched the careful way he moved, and something cold settled in the center of my chest and stayed there. The drive to St. Luke's Medical Center on Highway 105 took 14 minutes. I sat in the back with Dad, and he kept his hand on his knee the whole way, and I kept mine close but not grabbing, because he wasn't a man who wanted to be held, and I knew that, and I respected it. He looked out the window at the February morning and said, "Pecans are going to be bad this year. Too warm in January. Don't think about the pecans, Dad. Somebody has to." Frank glanced at us in the rearview mirror and said nothing, but I saw his mouth move slightly, and I understood he was holding something back, something that would have been warm and maybe funny, and he was holding it back because he knew this was my father and my moment, and he was just the driver, and a good man always knows when the moment doesn't belong to him. We checked in at the emergency desk at 9:14 in the morning. The intake nurse was a young woman named Priya, who was calm and unhurried and moved with that particular hospital efficiency that looks like nothing is wrong right up until the point where things move very fast. She took one look at Dad's symptoms and his age, and he was in a room within 12 minutes. The attending physician was a Dr. Marcus Webb. Compact man, clear eyes, the kind of doctor who gave you information like he respected your ability to handle it. He ordered an EKG and blood work immediately. "Mr. Calloway, I want to get a full picture before I tell you anything, but I don't ignore these symptoms in a man your age. We're going to be thorough." Dad looked at him. "Son, I've been thorough my whole life. It's overrated," Dr. Webb smiled. "Fair enough." I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Green plastic chairs, a television mounted too high on the wall running a local morning program on low volume, the specific quality of hospital light that makes everyone look slightly worse than they are. I drank coffee from a machine that tasted like it had been brewed in another decade. I checked my phone. Diane had sent one text at 10:03. "Did you find a ride?" That was it. Not, "How is he?" Not, "Is he okay?" Not even, "Let me know what the doctor says." Just, "Did you find a ride?" I put the phone face down on the seat next to me and left it there. Frank was in the parking lot. I knew without checking because he'd told me he would be, and Frank DeLuca had never in 15 years told me something that wasn't true. At 11:31, Dr. Webb came to find me. "Mr. Calloway." His voice was measured in the way that told me he had practiced delivering news that wasn't the worst news but wasn't good news either. "Your father has experienced what we call a non-ST elevation myocardial infarction, a mild heart attack. His heart muscle took some stress, but the damage appears limited. He's stable. We want to keep him for at least 2 days for observation and medication adjustment. He's stable. He's stable. He's also already asked me twice about his blood pressure medication and whether it can be adjusted so he only takes it once a day instead of twice." He paused. I told him I'd look into it. "That sounds right. He's asking for you." I went in. Dad was propped up against the pillows, an IV in his arm, the monitors doing their steady work behind him. He looked smaller in a hospital bed than he did anywhere else in the world, which was difficult to see, because Raymond Calloway had always taken up exactly the right amount of space. He looked up when I came in. His eyes were tired but clear. "Well," he said. "Turns out it wasn't nothing. Turns out I sat in the chair beside his bed." He looked at the door for a moment, then back at me. "Diane didn't come. It wasn't a question." My father had a way of saying things that were questions without making them sound like questions, because he wasn't asking for information. He already had it. "She had a lunch," I said. He didn't respond to that right away. He just looked at me in the steady, patient way he had looked at me my entire life. The way he used to look at a fence post he was evaluating, measuring what it was actually worth before deciding what to do about it. "She had a lunch," he repeated. Just the words. Flat. Precise. "Dad, when I had the surgery on my knee 4 years ago," he said, "she didn't come to that either. You told me she had a work deadline. She did have. And when you had your gallbladder out in 2021, she came for the first hour and then left. She had Don, just my name, 2 letters." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm not angry. I'm counting." I didn't say anything for a moment. There was a machine beeping softly behind him, regular and steady, and outside the window the Beaumont morning was gray and flat and honest. "I know you are," I said. He looked out the window for a while. Then, "I've been meaning to call Harold Briggs. Harold Briggs. Harold J. Briggs, attorney, downtown Beaumont, 26 years in practice." He had drawn up my father's will 8 years ago. Sharp man, deliberate, the kind of lawyer who never wasted a word. I kept my voice careful. "You don't have to do anything right now, Dad." He turned back from the window and looked at me with an expression I had seen exactly twice in my life, once when I wrecked his truck at 17, and, once, at my mother's funeral, the expression of a man who has decided something so completely that there is no longer any point in discussing whether he should decide it. Donald Raymond Calloway. All three. I straightened slightly without meaning to. "I have been running my own affairs since before your mother and I were married. I believe I can determine when it's time to make a phone call." I closed my mouth. "You'll stay while I call him." It wasn't a question either. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'll stay." He called Harold Briggs at 1:15 in the afternoon from a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and monitors tracking his heart, and he was calmer and more precise than most men are sitting at their own kitchen tables. He explained what he wanted in clear, simple language. Harold Briggs asked 3 clarifying questions. My father answered all 3 without hesitation. They scheduled Harold to come to St. Luke's the following morning. Dad hung up, set the phone on the bedside tray, and picked up the crossword book I'd found in the gift shop downstairs. 7-letter word, he said. Faithful. I thought about it. Devoted? He counted. No, that's 7, but it doesn't fit the crosses. He wrote something in. Staunch. 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 He filled it in with the satisfaction of a man who had accomplished 2 important things before lunch. I stayed until 5. We watched part of a nature documentary about the Everglades that neither of us had chosen and both of us got surprisingly invested in. He beat me at 2 rounds of a number game he invented using the digits on the hospital equipment, which I chose to believe was the medication giving him an unfair advantage, and which he chose to believe was simply him being smarter than me, which, fair enough. At 4:45, he set the remote down and looked at his hands for a moment. Dawn. His voice had shifted into the register he used for things that mattered. I need to say something, and I need you to hear it straight. I'm listening. What I'm doing tomorrow with Harold. It's not about punishing anyone. He looked at me. It's about accuracy. Your mother and I saved for 40 years. We went without things. We drove cars longer than we should have, and we took 1 vacation in 30 years of marriage, and it was a 4-day drive to see the Grand Canyon because that's what we could manage. A pause. What we built belongs with people who understand what it cost. He looked out the window again. The light was going gold and low over Beaumont. Diane has been in my life for 11 years, he said. I can count on one hand the times she showed up for something that mattered. His voice remained completely level. I've been accurate about that for a long time. I just hadn't done anything about it, Dad. And Don, he turned back. I need you to hear this part too. Not about Diane. About you. He looked at me steadily. You have been carrying that marriage alone for a long time. I've watched you do it. You make excuses. You smooth things over. You show up for everybody, and you come home to nothing. He said it the way he said everything, without drama, without embellishment, the way you describe a field that isn't producing. A man who shows up the way you do deserves someone who shows up back. That's not complicated, it's just true. The room was quiet except for the monitors. I looked at my father, 81 years old, in a hospital bed with a mild heart attack behind him and a crossword book in his lap and more clarity in his eyes than I had managed in 11 years. Yeah, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I know, Dad. He nodded once. Good. He picked up the crossword. Now go get me something from that cafeteria that isn't the color gray. I'm not asking for much. Harold Briggs arrived the next morning at 10 o'clock sharp. Gray suit, leather briefcase, silver pen. He shook my hand with the grip of a man who understood that the room he was entering required weight, and he sat down across from my father with his yellow legal pad, and he listened more than he talked. I sat in the corner. A witness. The meeting lasted 51 minutes. I won't put all of it here. Some of it belonged only to my father, and I will keep it that way. But I will tell you that by the time Harold Briggs clicked his pen and tucked his pad away, the document that had existed in some form for 8 years had been rewritten with the kind of clarity my father brought to everything he did. The house on Granger Road, paid off in 2003. My father's savings, built across 4 decades of careful, disciplined, unglamorous work. The 1,971 Chevrolet pickup truck that had been in the garage under a canvas cover since my mother died. The one my father would not sell, would not drive, would barely discuss. The one that still smelled faintly of her perfume on warm days when the garage heated up. The small CD collection my parents had kept since the 1980s, every album a memory. The mineral rights on the back 40 that a land company had been trying to buy for 6 years and that my father refused to sell on principle. All of it had a destination now. A clear one. A fair one. Diane's name appeared in none of it. Not once. Not my problem. Someone had said on a Tuesday morning. As it turned out, she had been exactly right about that. Harold shook my hand again at the door. He looked back across the room at my father, who was already returning to the Everglades documentary with the composure of a man who had finished his paperwork and moved on. Your father, Harold said quietly, is one of the most clear-headed clients I've had in 26 years. I looked at him too. He always has been, I said. I just didn't always know how to match it. I brought him home, to Granger Road, 2 days later. He walked out of St. Luke's under his own power, refused the wheelchair at the exit with the polite firmness of a man who had survived a great deal and found wheelchairs to be an unnecessary commentary on that fact, and climbed into Frank's truck with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been given instructions he intended to follow. Frank drove. Old country station, low on the radio. The February fields going past the windows, brown and flat and dormant, waiting for something. Dad looked out at them and said, "Gonna be a good spring. I can feel it." Frank said, "Raymond, the last time you said that, we had a late frost in March. And the pecans still came in fine." "They really did," Frank said. "They really did." I got Dad settled at the kitchen table on Granger Road with his tea, the specific kind, 2 bags, 4 minutes exactly, a habit I had learned from watching Mom do it and then doing it myself every visit for years. I went through his new medications from Dr. Webb one by one, reading every label, every instruction, every timing requirement. He listened with his hands around the mug and his eyes patient and attentive. When I finished, he said, "Sit down, Don." I sat. He covered my hand with his. His hand was rough and dry and warm, the hand that had taught me to throw a baseball and change a tire and shake someone's hand like I meant it. The hand that had held my mother's at the very end, and mine the next morning when neither of us had words for any of it. "What I did this week," he said, "I did because it was right. Not to settle a score. I want you to understand that." "I do." "Good." He squeezed my hand once. "Now, I want you to think about something, and I want you to take your time with it." He looked at me. "Are you living the life you want, or the life you've gotten used to?" because those are two very different things, and a lot of men spend a long time confusing them. I didn't answer right away. Outside on Granger Road, a cardinal landed on the fence post by the driveway and sat there for a moment, read as a warning, and then was gone. I'm working on knowing the difference, I said finally. My father looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like that was the right answer, or at least the honest one. That'll do for now, he said. He picked up his tea. That'll do. I left Granger Road at 2 in the afternoon and drove home to Beaumont. My own truck, out of the garage now, running clean. I pulled into the driveway behind Diane's Lexus and sat for a moment with the engine off. 37 missed calls. 37. I had counted them over the past 2 days without answering a single one. Not out of strategy, not out of planning, but simply because I had nothing to say that was ready yet. The right words were still forming into something solid enough to stand on. I went inside. Diane was in the living room. She was sitting with her knees together and both hands in her lap, the specific posture of a woman who had been waiting and had decided the waiting was going to cost the other person something. She looked up the moment I walked through the door. Her face was not the face I was used to seeing. The composure was fractured somewhere in the last 2 days, and underneath it was something raw, something that looked like a person who had spent 2 days counting backward and not liking the sum. Dawn. She stood. I've been calling you. I know. I set my keys on the hook by the door. Harold Briggs' office called, she said. Her voice was controlled, but the control was working hard. To confirm that the updated documents had been filed. I didn't understand why they would call me, and then I did. I didn't say anything. Dawn, she rewrote everything. I know, everything. Do you? She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. Do you understand what that means for us? What we've been counting on? I looked at her then, really looked, and I thought about my father in that hospital bed, monitors beeping, IV in his arm, 31 years of never asking for a single thing, and the one morning he called and said, I don't feel right, and what had been standing at the top of those stairs with a wireless earpiece and a lunch to get to. Diane, I said, what were you counting on? Exactly, she blinked, because I'd like to hear you say it out loud. I'd like to hear what number you had in your head, and whether at any point in the last 2 days, between call number 1 and call number 37, that number felt worth what it cost. The color shifted in her face, slowly, like something receding. I was going to come to the hospital, she said. You had a lunch. It was a client lunch, Dawn. It was. Diane. I said it the way my father said my name when he was done discussing. Just the word. Flat and final, and already past the argument. My father's heart was failing on a Tuesday morning, and you had a client lunch, and you told me to figure it out. I looked at her evenly. I figured it out. Frank DeLuca figured it out. My 81-year-old father in a hospital bed figured it out. A pause. You went to lunch. She looked at me across the living room, really looked, the way people sometimes finally look when the version of things they've been maintaining becomes too expensive to keep up. And I watched something move across her face that I recognized. Not guilt exactly, not remorse exactly, but the specific expression of a person who has realized the account is empty and the branch is closed. Talk to him, she said quietly. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. He would listen to you. He made his decision, I said, the same way you made yours. Clearly, deliberately, without asking anyone's permission. I picked up my keys from the hook. He spent 81 years deciding where things go when he's done with them. He doesn't owe anyone a second conversation about that. Where are you going? To check on my father. I opened the front door. The February air came in cold and clean and without apology. He made something good for me, Diane. His whole life, that's what he did. Made something good. I looked at her one last time. I'm going to try to do the same. I pulled the door closed behind me. The air hit my face and I stood there for a moment on the front step, breathing it in. Cold and flat and real. The kind of air that doesn't lie about what month it is or what it's asking of you. The pecan tree in my own yard, a smaller one than Dad's, had dropped everything it had and stood bare-branched against the February sky, and I stood there looking at it and understood something I hadn't been ready to understand before. I had been a careful man my whole life. Careful with my words and careful with my feelings, and careful not to ask too much of anyone. I had called it patience. I had called it consideration. I had told myself that keeping things even was the same as keeping things good. It wasn't. I knew that now. Raymond Calloway had spent 2 days in a hospital bed being clearer about my life than I had been in 11 years, and I was standing on a front step on a cold February morning finally, completely, catching up to him. I had not been building a marriage. I had been maintaining a silence, filling in the spaces where a partner should have been, smoothing over the absences so consistently that I had nearly convinced myself they weren't there. They were there. They had always been there. My father's voice was still in my ear. Are you living the life you want, or the life you've gotten used to? I knew the answer. I had known it for a while. I just hadn't been ready to make it mean something yet. I walked to my truck, started the engine, pulled out of the driveway. The radio came on low. An old song, something I had heard in my parents' kitchen 10,000 times, the kind of song that carries a whole room inside it when you hear it. I let it play. I didn't turn it down. I had a father to get back to. An 81-year-old man on Granger Road with good tea and a crossword book and more hard-won wisdom than I had properly appreciated for most of my adult life. A man who had built something, and kept it, and knew exactly where it belonged. I was going to show up for him, every morning, every evening, every time he needed me, and every time he was too proud to say he did. That was not a decision I made that afternoon. That was a promise I had been keeping for 64 years without realizing it had a name. Some men spend their whole lives waiting to become their fathers. I pulled onto Highway 105 and understood, for the first time with my whole chest, that I already was one, and that it was the best thing I had ever been given. If this story found you at the right time, brothers and fathers, then you already know why. Hit that like button, leave a comment below, let me know where you're watching from and what this one brought up for you. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more stories coming, and I will see you on the next one. Pay attention to the people who show up without being asked twice. Frank didn't need an explanation. Raymond didn't need to be convinced. They moved because that's simply who they were, and those are the people worth building your life around. If you've been carrying things alone for too long, maybe it's time to look up and notice who's already waiting in the driveway. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while sharing a life lesson worth holding on to.